The battle entered its 7th hour, and Velketh had stopped trying to understand what he was seeing. His recording devices captured everything. Every explosion, every desperate maneuver, every impossible act of courage. But his mind could not accept the data his eyes were sending. Nothing in his training as a scientist had prepared him for this. He watched the ESS Valiant, her engines destroyed by 3 direct hits, position herself in the path of a Vorax assault wave. The ship could not move. She could not fight. She was dying, venting atmosphere and fire into the void. But she could still block. Commander Tyler Mason's voice crackled over the open channel. "All hands, this is the captain. Divert all power to forward shields. We are not moving, but neither are they." The Vorax assault wave numbered 40 ships. They hammered the Valiant with everything they had. Energy beams cut into her hull. Missiles tore away her armor piece by piece. For 17 minutes, the dying ship absorbed punishment that should have destroyed her in seconds. In that time, 6 transport ships carrying 12,000 civilians slipped past the blocked corridor and reached safe space. When the Valiant finally exploded, Commander Mason was still giving orders. Velketh turned to his assistant, a young Tirani named Kethal. "Are your instruments functioning correctly?" Kethal checked his equipment with trembling hands. "Yes, Observer. All readings are accurate." "That cannot be possible. Human biology cannot sustain this level of stress. Their nervous systems should have failed hours ago. Their bodies should have shut down from shock and pain." "The data does not lie, Observer. They are still fighting." On the planet's surface below, the ground battle was even worse. Sergeant Kevin Brooks led a squad of 24 Marines defending the last evacuation point. They had been fighting for 9 hours straight. Half of them were wounded. All of them were exhausted. But they kept fighting. The Vorax had landed ground troops 3 hours ago. Thousands of warriors poured out of dropships, their chitinous bodies clicking and hissing as they advanced. They were twice the size of humans, armored in natural shell, armed with weapons grown from their own flesh. Kevin's squad held a corridor in the evacuation center. Behind them, the last transport was loading civilians. 3,000 people, mostly women and children, were crowding up the boarding ramps. "How much longer?" Kevin shouted into his radio. 15 minutes, Sergeant," came the reply. "We need 15 more minutes." Kevin looked at his Marines. Private First Class Maria Santos had taken a hit to her shoulder. The wound was bad, but she had wrapped it with a torn piece of uniform and kept firing. Corporal Danny Webb had a broken leg. He had propped himself against a wall and was using both hands to steady his rifle. None of them talked about retreat. None of them talked about surrender. "You heard them," Kevin said. 15 minutes. We hold this corridor for 15 minutes, and 3,000 people go home to their families. Can you do that?" "Yes, Sergeant," they answered together. The Vorax came in waves. The first wave hit the corridor at full speed, climbing over each other in their eagerness to reach the humans. Kevin's squad cut them down with concentrated fire. Bodies piled up at the entrance, creating a barrier of the dead. The second wave used the bodies as cover, crawling over their fallen comrades to get closer. The humans switched to grenades, filling the corridor with fire and smoke. The attack faltered. "Ammunition count," Kevin ordered. The reports came back grim. They were running low on everything. Rifle magazines were down to single digits. Grenades were almost gone. Several Marines had already drawn their sidearms. "Fix bayonets," Kevin said quietly. The Marines attached their blades without hesitation. They knew what that order meant. When the ammunition ran out, they would fight with steel and bare hands. The third wave came harder than the first two combined. Vorax warriors poured into the corridor, too many to count. Kevin's squad fired until their rifles clicked empty. Then they charged. The fighting became hand-to-hand. Marines stabbed and slashed with bayonets. Vorax clawed and bit with natural weapons. The corridor turned into a hell of blood and screaming. Kevin took a wound to his stomach. A Vorax claw had punched through his armor and torn into his flesh. He felt the pain, hot and terrible, spreading through his body. He had maybe minutes to live. But the transport was still loading. He kept fighting. For 40 more minutes, Kevin Brooks fought, with his intestines held in by one hand, and his rifle in the other. He killed 16 more Vorax, before his body finally gave out. His last sight was the transport lifting off, its engines bright against the dark sky. 3,000 people went home because of him. In orbit, Velketh watched the biometric data from Kevin's suit. The readings showed a body that should have died within seconds of receiving that wound. Instead, it had continued fighting for 40 minutes. The stress levels, the pain indicators, the blood loss, all of it pointed to immediate death. But the human had refused to die. "This is not possible," Velketh whispered. "The body cannot override its own biology. The nervous system cannot ignore signals of this magnitude." Megan Price heard him from across the bridge. "You still do not understand," she said. Her voice was tired. Blood was still dripping down her face, and every breath sent fire through her broken ribs. But she was still standing. "Then explain it to me," Velketh said. "Explain how your species defies physical reality." Megan was quiet for a moment. "When I was a girl, my grandmother told me a story. During a war on Earth, a soldier named Ben Salomon was a dentist. He was treating wounded men when the enemy attacked. He picked up a rifle and held a position alone so his patients could escape. He killed 98 enemy soldiers before he died. They found his body surrounded by the men he had killed." She looked at Velketh with eyes that had seen too much death. He was not special. He was not a super soldier or a genetic experiment. He was a dentist, a man who fixed teeth for a living. But when the moment came, he became something more. She gestured at the tactical display, where the last human ships were still fighting against impossible odds. "That is what you are seeing today. Ordinary people becoming more than they should be. Mothers and fathers and children, finding strength they never knew they had. It is not magic. It is not biology. It is will. Pure, stubborn human will." Velketh looked at his data again. His scientific training screamed that this was impossible. Bodies had limits. Minds had limits. Physics had limits. But humans seemed to have none. The Battle of Kepler-7 continued for 4 more hours. By the end, humanity had lost 31 of their 42 ships. Over 4,000 sailors and marines were dead. The survivors were wounded, exhausted, and broken. But every civilian had escaped. Every transport had reached safety. And the Vorax swarm, shocked and bleeding, finally retreated. They had come expecting easy prey. They had found something else entirely. They had found humanity. The Galactic Council chamber was silent for the first time in 800 years. High Counselor Zethron sat frozen in his seat, his scales pale with shock. Around him, delegates from 47 species stared at the holographic displays with expressions of disbelief. Some had their mouths open. Others had closed their eyes, unable to watch anymore. The recordings from Kepler-7 played on loop above the central platform. They showed the ESS Valiant absorbing 17 direct hits while her captain calmly directed power to shields. They showed Commander Grant steering his dying ship into a Vorax carrier, choosing death to save 12,000 children. They showed Sergeant Kevin Brooks fighting for 40 minutes with a wound that should have killed him in seconds. And they showed the numbers. "Confirmed kill count," the council analyst announced, her voice shaking. "Human forces destroyed 2,312 Vorax vessels." Ground forces eliminated approximately 14,000 Vorax warriors. She paused, struggling with the next words. Human losses, 31 ships, 4,207 personnel. The math was impossible. A force of 42 ships and 6,000 soldiers had inflicted casualties at a ratio of nearly 50 to 1. Against the Vorax. Against the swarm that had destroyed 17 civilizations without significant resistance. Ambassador Krivesh sat in his usual seat, but he was not laughing now. His 4 eyes were fixed on the display showing Marine Corporal Ashley Turner. The recording showed her pinned under fallen debris, both legs crushed beyond repair. She could not move, she could not escape, but she could still shoot. For 11 minutes, Ashley Turner held off an entire Vorax boarding party with her sidearm. 19 confirmed kills. When her ammunition ran out, she pulled a grenade from her vest. "Come and get me," she said on the recording. The explosion took 12 more Vorax with her. "This is not possible," whispered a delegate from the Methane Collective. "The biometric data must be corrupted. No organism can sustain that level of damage and continue functioning." Velketh, the Tyranny observer who had witnessed the battle firsthand, rose from his seat. His hands were still trembling, even though 3 days had passed since his return. "The data is accurate," he said. "I verified it myself, multiple times. The humans performed exactly as the recordings show." "But how?" demanded another delegate. "Their species has no special biological adaptations. They have no regeneration abilities. No enhanced healing, no pain suppression organs. They are ordinary biological creatures." Velketh shook his head slowly. "Lieutenant Commander Price explained it to me, though I still struggle to understand." He activated his personal recorder, and Megan Price's voice filled the chamber. "You keep asking about our bodies. You keep looking for the biological explanation. But you are asking the wrong questions. Human strength does not come from our bodies. It comes from our minds, from our hearts, from something we call will." The recording continued. "When a human decides that something matters more than their own survival, their body becomes a tool. Pain becomes information to be processed, not a command to be obeyed. Damage becomes a problem to be managed, not a reason to stop. Death becomes acceptable, as long as the mission is complete. This is not unique to soldiers. It is not the result of training or genetic selection. It exists in all of us. Every human carries this potential. We simply need a reason to use it." The recording ended. High Counselor Zethran finally found his voice. "Ambassador Cole," he said, turning to the human representative, who had stood quietly at the edge of the chamber throughout the presentation. "Do you have anything to add?" Nathan Cole walked slowly to the central platform. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, when this same council had laughed at his request for help. His eyes were tired, filled with the weight of 4,000 dead. "You asked about our myths," he said quietly. "You thought they were fantasies invented by a primitive species. Lies we told ourselves to feel important. Propaganda to hide our weakness." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who could no longer meet his. "You were wrong. Our myths are not lies. They are memories, records of what our ancestors actually did, preserved across generations so that we would never forget what humans are capable of." He gestured at the display, where the image of Kevin Brooks was still visible, his face frozen in determination, even as his life bled away. This man was a schoolteacher before he joined the military. He taught history to 10-year-old children. He had a wife who was expecting their first baby in 2 months. He liked cooking and bad movies and falling asleep on the couch. Nathan's voice grew harder. He was ordinary, just like the 300 Spartans were ordinary, just like Audie Murphy was ordinary, just like every hero in our myths was ordinary, until the moment came that demanded more. He turned to face Krivesh directly. "You asked if we would summon our gods to save us. The answer is no. We do not need gods. We have something better. We have each other. We have the knowledge that when everything is lost, when death is certain, when there is no hope left, a human will stand up and fight anyway. The chamber remained silent. And every generation, Nathan continued, we prove ourselves worthy of those memories. We add new names to the list, new stories to tell, new myths that future generations will look at with wonder, asking themselves if such things are really possible. He pointed at the display. Now you know the answer. Yes, they are possible, because we are human, and this is what we do. High Counselor Zethran was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost all trace of its previous arrogance. Ambassador Cole, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I offer our deepest apologies. We underestimated your species. We mocked your history. We refused aid when aid was desperately needed. He lowered his gray head. We were fools. Nathan nodded slowly. Yes, Counselor, you were. But you have the chance to learn from that mistake. The Vorax are still out there. They have retreated for now, but they will return. When they do, they will be prepared for what humans can do. The question is whether the Council will be prepared as well. Whether you will stand beside us, or watch from a distance, while we fight alone again. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen languages. Some called for immediate military alliance with Earth. Others demanded caution. A few still muttered about primitive species and lucky accidents. But the mood had changed. Everyone had seen the recordings. Everyone had watched ordinary humans become legends. And everyone was afraid of what would happen if humanity ever decided to turn that power against them instead of defending them. Ambassador Krivesh rose from his seat and walked down to the central platform. He stopped in front of Nathan Cole and bowed his head. I mocked your myths, he said. I called your histories lies. I was wrong, and I am sorry. Nathan studied the alien for a long moment. Apologies are a start, he said finally. But words are not enough. If you want to make things right, fight beside us. Prove that your species has courage too. Krivesh met his eyes. We will, he said. I swear it. The Galactic Council session continued late into the night. Debates raged, votes were taken, alliances were formed. But one thing was already clear. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Kepler-7. In that time, the galaxy had changed in ways no one had predicted. Military academies on 100 different worlds began studying human tactics, human psychology, human history. Scientists struggled to understand how ordinary biological creatures could push themselves so far beyond normal limits. The Vorax swarm, which had conquered 17 civilizations without significant resistance, declared humanity a Class 1 existential threat. For the first time in their existence, the hive mind knew fear. They had encountered prey that fought harder when wounded, prey that became more dangerous when cornered, prey that treated death as a choice, not a sentence. The swarm retreated to their core worlds to regroup and plan. They would not attack humanity again without overwhelming force and careful preparation. Even then, they were not sure they could win. On Earth, the survivors of Kepler-7 came home to a world that had watched the battle live on every screen. Crowds filled the streets to welcome them. Children held signs with the names of the dead. Old soldiers who had fought in Earth's ancient wars stood at attention as the transports landed. Lieutenant Commander Megan Price walked down the ramp of her shuttle into bright sunlight. She had spent 3 weeks in a medical station, healing from her broken ribs and the dozens of smaller wounds she had ignored during the battle. She walked with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of what they had sacrificed. Reporters surrounded her immediately, shouting questions, pushing microphones toward her face. "Commander Price, how does it feel to be a hero?" "Commander, the Council is calling Kepler-7 the most important battle in galactic history. Do you agree?" "Commander, what would you say to the aliens who mocked humanity before the battle?" Megan held up her hand, and the crowd fell silent. She looked at the reporters, at the cameras, at the millions of people watching from around the world. "I am not a hero," she said quietly. "I did my job. That is all any of us did. We saw what needed to be done, and we did it. The real heroes are the ones who did not come home." She paused, her eyes distant. Tyler Mason, who held his dying ship in the path of 40 enemy vessels so that transports could escape. Kevin Brooks, who fought for 40 minutes with a wound that should have killed him in seconds. Ashley Turner, who used her last breath to take 12 enemies with her. Those are the heroes. I just had the privilege of serving beside them. A young reporter raised her hand. "Commander, what would you say to the families of the fallen?" Megan was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I would say that your loved ones saved 90,000 lives. Every child who grows up on Kepler-7 will know their names. Every family that went home safe will remember their sacrifice. They gave everything so that others could live. There is no greater honor than that." She turned and walked away before anyone could ask another question. Some things were too personal to share with cameras and crowds. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council signed a mutual defense treaty with Earth. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall where Nathan Cole had once begged for help and been laughed at. Now the same delegates who had mocked humanity lined up to add their signatures to the agreement. High Counselor Zethron spoke first. "This treaty represents a new era for the galactic community. Humanity has proven itself worthy of standing among the great civilizations. They have shown us what courage truly means." He turned to face the human delegation. "We do not sign this treaty out of charity or pity. We sign it out of respect, and if I am honest, out of wisdom. The Vorax will return. When they do, I want humanity fighting beside us, not against us." Light laughter rippled through the chamber, but it was different from before. It was the laughter of allies sharing a joke, not enemies mocking the weak. Ambassador Nathan Cole rose to accept the treaty. He looked tired but satisfied. The ghosts of 4,000 dead still haunted his eyes, but there was peace there too. 6 months ago, I stood in this chamber and asked for help. I was refused. I was mocked. I was told that human myths were lies, that human courage was propaganda, that human soldiers would surrender at the first sign of danger. He smiled slightly. I did not argue. I did not complain. I simply said that I hoped you would find the observations educational. He looked around the chamber. I hope you learned your lesson. The delegates nodded, some with shame, some with respect, all with new understanding. Humanity does not seek conflict, Nathan continued. We do not dream of conquest or glory. We want to live in peace, to raise our children, to explore the stars. But when peace is not possible, when our families are threatened, when there is no other choice, we will fight, and we will win. He picked up the treaty document. This agreement binds us together in defense of all our peoples. It promises that no member will face the darkness alone. That is a promise we take seriously. If any of your worlds are attacked, humanity will come. We will bring our ships and our soldiers and our stubborn, impossible human will. We will stand beside you until the threat is ended or until we are all dead. He signed the document with a simple pen, the same pen his father had used to sign the papers that made him an ambassador 30 years ago. That is not a myth. That is a promise. The chamber erupted in applause. After the ceremony, Megan Price stood before the memorial wall that had been built in the council station. It was made of black stone, polished to a mirror finish. Carved into its surface were the names of everyone who had died at Kepler 7. She found the name she was looking for: Tyler Mason, Kevin Brooks, Ashley Turner, Samuel Green, the engineer who had sealed himself inside a burning reactor compartment to save his ship; Maria Santos, the Marine who had kept fighting with a shattered shoulder; Danny Webb, who had held a position with a broken leg until the evacuation was complete. 4,207 names. 4,207 ordinary people who had become legends. At the bottom of the wall, a simple inscription read, "They held the line." Ambassador Krivesh approached her quietly. He stood beside her for a long moment, studying the names. "I knew many soldiers from my own species," he said finally. "Good warriors, brave in their own way, but I do not think any of them would have done what your people did." Megan did not look at him. "You might be surprised. Courage is not unique to humans. It exists in all thinking beings. We just learned how to use it a long time ago." "How?" Krivesh asked. "How did you learn?" Megan thought about the question for a while. "I think it comes from our history. We spent thousands of years fighting each other, fighting nature, fighting extinction. Every generation faced some challenge that should have destroyed us. Ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions." She traced her finger along one of the names on the wall. "We survived because ordinary people found the strength to do impossible things, and we remembered them. We told their stories to our children. We built monuments and wrote songs and made sure their sacrifice was never forgotten." She finally looked at Krivesh. "Over time, those stories became part of who we are. When a human faces death, they do not just fight for themselves. They fight for everyone who came before them. They fight to be worthy of the ancestors who gave everything so that we could exist." Krivesh nodded slowly. "I think I understand now. Your myths are not lies. They are inheritance." "Yes," Megan said, "and every generation we add to that inheritance. We prove that the old stories were true by living up to them." She turned back to the wall, to the names of her friends and comrades. Today, these names join that inheritance. 1,000 years from now, humans will tell stories about Kepler 7, about Tyler and Kevin and Ashley and all the others. And when those future humans face their own impossible challenges, they will think of these names and find the strength to keep fighting. She placed her hand flat against the cold stone. "That is the true power of humanity. Not our ships or our weapons or our technology. Our memory, our will, our refusal to give up, no matter how dark things become." Krivesh bowed his head respectfully. "Then the galaxy is fortunate to have you as allies." Megan smiled, the first real smile she had managed since the battle. "Yes," she said, "it is." Behind them, the stars burned cold and bright in the eternal darkness. The Vorax were still out there, planning their next move. Other threats lurked in the shadows between worlds. The future was uncertain, dangerous, and full of challenges that had not yet been imagined. But humanity was ready. They had always been ready. And now the galaxy knew it. The Council had mocked human myths. They would never make that mistake again. The warning sirens began at dawn. Lieutenant Commander Megan Price was drinking her morning coffee when the alarm cut through the quiet of the ship. The cup fell from her hand and shattered on the floor, but she was already running before the pieces stopped moving. She reached the bridge of the ESS Defiance in less than 2 minutes. Her crew was already at their stations, their faces pale but determined. The main view screen showed a sight that made her blood run cold. The Vorax swarm had arrived. Thousands of ships filled the darkness of space. They moved like a cloud of insects, shifting and swirling in patterns that made no sense to human eyes. Each ship was black and angular, covered in spines and weapons. Together they blocked out the stars. "How many?" Megan asked, her voice steady, despite the fear in her heart. Ensign Derek Simmons worked his console with shaking hands. Tactical count shows approximately 12,000 enemy vessels, Commander. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel about 10 minutes ago. 12,000 ships, against humanity's 42. Evacuation status? Megan asked. Colony reports 60% complete. 36,000 civilians are already on transport ships heading for safe space. 54,000 remain on the surface. Time needed to complete evacuation? Derek swallowed hard. At current loading rates, approximately 4 hours. 4 hours. They needed to hold back 12,000 enemy ships for 4 hours. Megan turned to look at the alien observer standing in the corner of the bridge. His name was Velketh, a Tirani scientist sent by the Council to document the battle. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he studied the tactical display. Commander, Velketh said, mathematical reality requires that I inform you of your situation. Your forces cannot survive engagement with a swarm of this magnitude. Surrender is the logical choice. Megan walked toward him slowly. She was not a tall woman, but something in her eyes made the alien step backward. You wanted to see human myths in action, she said quietly. Pay attention. She turned back to her crew. Open a channel to all ships in the fleet. Channel open, Commander. Megan took a deep breath. She thought about her parents back on Earth, her younger brother who had just started college, the letter she had written him last night but never sent. All ships, this is Lieutenant Commander Price of the ESS Defiance. I will not lie to you. You can see the tactical display as well as I can. The enemy outnumbers us 300 to 1. Our ships are slower. Our weapons are weaker. By any reasonable measure, we have already lost this battle. She paused, letting her words sink in. But behind us are 90,000 civilians who are counting on us to buy them time. Every minute we hold is another transport that escapes. Every enemy ship we destroy is one that will not threaten our families. Every second we fight is a second that matters. Her voice grew stronger. Our ancestors held mountain passes against impossible odds. They charged across open fields into machine gun fire. They crawled through burning buildings to save strangers. They stood up to tyrants when no one else would. That blood runs in our veins. Those memories live in our hearts. She gripped the railing of her command platform. Today we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Today we prove that our myths are not lies. They are promises. And we keep our promises. Across the fleet, men and women gripped their stations with white knuckles. Some were crying. Some were praying. All were ready. All ships, Megan said, engage the enemy. The 42 human ships surged forward. On the bridge of the Defiance, Velketh watched in confusion. This is madness, he said. Your forces should retreat. Form a defensive line. Prepare for surrender. Why are you attacking? Lieutenant Jason Park, the tactical officer, answered without looking up from his console. Because defense means waiting to die. Attack means choosing how we die. And we choose to die fighting. The first wave of missiles launched from the human fleet. They streaked across the darkness like shooting stars, finding targets among the packed ranks of Vorax ships. Explosions bloomed in the void. The Vorax responded with overwhelming force. Beams of energy cut through space. Missiles flew in swarms. The darkness lit up with the fire of battle. A Vorax beam cut through her port side, killing 30 crew members instantly. But she did not retreat. Instead, she turned toward the enemy ship that had wounded her and returned fire, destroying it before it could strike again. Damage reports coming in from across the fleet, Derek reported. Courage has lost her port weapons. Spirit is venting atmosphere on 3 decks. Valor reports engine damage. Tell them to hold formation, Megan ordered. We need to keep the corridor to the planet clear. The battle continued. Minutes stretched into hours. Human ships took hit after hit, but they kept fighting. When weapons failed, they rammed enemy vessels. When engines died, they used their remaining power to shield other ships. The Vorax had never seen anything like it. Their swarm tactics depended on prey that behaved rationally, prey that retreated when wounded, prey that surrendered when defeat was certain. Humans did none of these things. Commander Alex Grant of the ESS Horizon watched his ship burn around him. Fires raged through 3 decks. Half his crew was dead. His engines were failing. His weapons were empty. A Vorax carrier was moving toward the evacuation corridor. If it reached the transports, thousands would die. "All hands," Grant said over the intercom, "prepare for collision course. It has been an honor serving with you." The Horizon accelerated on her failing engines, aimed directly at the carrier. Vorax weapons hammered her hull, tearing away armor and breaking her spine. But she kept coming. The collision split the carrier in 2. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from the planet below. On the Defiance, Velketh stared at his instruments with wide eyes. That captain just killed himself and his entire crew to destroy one enemy ship. "Yes," Megan said simply, "he did." "But why? His ship was already dying. He could have escaped in a life pod. He could have surrendered." Megan did not look at him. Because the transports in that corridor were carrying 6,000 children, and Commander Grant had a daughter. The battle raged on. More human ships fell, but the evacuation continued. Transport after transport rose from the planet's surface and fled to safety. 4 hours passed, then 5, then 6. The Vorax swarm, confused and bleeding from wounds they had never expected, began to hesitate. Their hive mind could not understand creatures that fought harder when wounded. Prey was not supposed to be dangerous when it was dying. On the bridge of the Defiance, Megan Price fought with 3 broken ribs from a console explosion. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye. She never stopped giving orders. "How many civilians are left?" she asked. "Final transports are launching now," Derek reported. "Last count shows all 90,000 evacuated or in flight." Megan closed her eyes for a moment. They had done it. Against all odds, against all logic, they had saved everyone. "Commander," Velketh said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Your myths are not lies." Megan opened her eyes and looked at the alien. "No," she said, "they never were." Outside, the battle continued, but humanity had already won. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest building in the known universe. It floated in the darkness of space, far from any star or planet. Ships from 100 different worlds came and went from its many docking ports. Inside, representatives from 47 species gathered to discuss matters of trade, war, and peace. On this day, the hall was full. Every seat was taken. The air hummed with quiet conversations in dozens of alien languages. Translators worked hard to keep up with the flow of words. Ambassador Nathan Cole stood at the entrance and took a deep breath. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years in the diplomatic service of Earth. He had negotiated with criminals, dictators, and madmen, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He was the first human to address the full Galactic Council. Earth had been admitted to the Coalition 6 months ago. It was a small achievement, in some ways. Humans were young compared to most species. Their technology was basic. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. Many council members had voted against letting humans join at all. But Nathan had worked hard to change minds. He had smiled at insults. He had ignored mockery. He had played the part of the humble newcomer, grateful for any attention from his betters. Today, he needed something from them, and he was not sure they would give it. The council chamber was shaped like a bowl. Seats rose in circles around a central platform. Nathan walked down the long ramp to that platform, feeling thousands of eyes on his back. Some of those eyes were warm and curious. Most were cold and dismissive. High Counselor Zethron sat at the highest point of the chamber. He was a massive creature, 3 meters tall, with scales that shimmered between blue and green. His species, the Vornathi, had ruled the council for 800 years. They were old, powerful, and very proud. Zethran raised one clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Ambassador Cole of Earth," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You have requested time to address the council. Speak your piece." Nathan bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, High Counselor. I come before you today with a simple request. Our colony on the planet Kepler-7 is in danger. Our intelligence reports suggest that the Vorax swarm is moving toward our sector." A ripple of reaction passed through the chamber. The Vorax were feared by all. They were not a single species, but a collection of many, all serving a hive mind that hungered for conquest. In the past century, they had destroyed 17 civilizations. Nathan continued, "We have 42 ships defending the colony. 90,000 civilians live there. We request additional defensive vessels from the Council's reserve fleet." Silence followed his words. Then, slowly, laughter began to spread through the chamber. Ambassador Krivesh of the Tyranny leaned forward in his seat. He was a thin creature with gray skin and 4 large eyes that blinked independently. His species was known for their intelligence and their cruelty. "The humans want warships," Krivesh said, his voice dripping with amusement. "How charming. Tell me, Ambassador, what will you do with them? Will you defeat the Vorax with your mythical heroes? Perhaps you will summon one of your gods to fight for you." More laughter filled the chamber. Nathan kept his face calm. "I am afraid I do not understand the joke, Ambassador." Krivesh smiled, showing rows of small sharp teeth. "We have studied your species, human. We have read your literature. Your so-called legends." He activated a holographic display that floated in the air above the chamber. Images appeared, paintings and photographs from Earth's past. "Hercules," Krivesh said, pointing to a muscular figure wrestling a lion. "A man who could lift mountains and defeat monsters with his bare hands. Achilles, a warrior who could not be wounded. The 300 Spartans, who supposedly held back an army of millions." More images flashed by, soldiers from different eras of human history. Names appeared beneath them: Audie Murphy, Simo Haiha, Leo Major, Alvin York. "Your military records claim that single soldiers defeated entire enemy units," Krivesh continued. "That wounded men continued fighting for hours after receiving injuries that should have killed them instantly. That ordinary humans performed feats that defy all biological possibility." He turned his 4 eyes toward Nathan. "Surely you do not believe such fantasies, Ambassador? Surely you understand that these are just stories. Propaganda invented to make a primitive species feel significant." Nathan said nothing. High Counselor Zethran nodded slowly. "Every young civilization invents such tales," he said. "It is a natural part of development. The Tyranny told stories of their great hunters. The Vornathi sang songs of our ancient warriors. But we outgrew such childish things long ago." "Humans are still children," said another delegate, a blob-like creature from the methane world of Graxis. "They have not yet learned the difference between myth and reality." "Perhaps they never will," Krivesh added. "Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand." Nathan stood very still as the laughter continued around him. His hands were clasped behind his back. His face showed nothing, but inside, something cold was growing in his chest. He had expected mockery. But, hearing these aliens dismiss the sacrifices of human soldiers, the courage of men and women who had died defending their homes and families, that was harder to bear than he had imagined. Finally, the laughter died down. High Counselor Zethran raised his hand again. "Ambassador Cole, Your request for additional vessels is denied. The Council does not waste resources on lost causes. If the Vorax swarm attacks Kepler-7, we suggest you evacuate your civilians and abandon the colony. And if evacuation is not possible in time? Nathan asked quietly. Zethrin shrugged his massive shoulders. Then you will surrender. The Vorax sometimes take prisoners. Some of them even survive. I see, Nathan said. And the Council will send no aid at all? We will send observers, Privesh said brightly. Scientific teams to document the battle. It will be educational to see how humans respond to a real military threat. Perhaps your mythical heroes will appear to save you. He laughed at his own joke. Nathan nodded slowly. Of course, just observers, to watch and learn. Exactly, Zethrin said. You may go now, Ambassador. This council has more important matters to discuss. Nathan bowed again. Thank you for your time, counselors. I hope you will find the observations educational indeed. He turned and walked back up the ramp, leaving the laughter behind him. His face was calm, his steps were steady, but his eyes were cold as ice. The aliens thought human myths were lies. They thought human courage was exaggeration. They thought human soldiers were weak, soft, unable to fight against true danger. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 weeks later, the Vorax swarm arrived at Kepler-7, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again.